For as far back as United States history goes, racism has always been a problem. Unfortunately, that is what our country has been built upon. Fast forward to the Civil Rights Movement time period, there was a lot of progress that was made with racism. However, racism is still a problem today. Every generation has a different kind of racism or different and new factors that are implemented into it. In our society today, we see a lot of racism in workplaces, education, healthcare, etc. Today, I hope to persuade you to learn more about systemic racism. USA Today shared on June 15th of 2020 that over the summer, thousands took the streets in wake of George Floyd's death to demand an end for police brutality and racism. This shows us how important it is for our society to wake up and take a stand to gain more knowledge and help fix these issues like systemic racism. First, I'm going to be talking about the problems. There are two major problems that goes into systemic racism. One being police brutality and the other being poor education for minorities. It is a known fact that racism is embedded in our society and law enforcement. It has been a bigger issue for the past few years because of all the media outlets and stories that have been on the news. Mainly, minorities, especially African Americans, are heavily targeted by police officers just because of their race. In October of 2021, Public Policy Institute of California shared that Black Californians are about 3 times more likely to be seriously injured, killed, or shot by police officers. It's stories and statistics like these that make us fear, especially minorities, but fear for everyday traffic stops or any interaction with police officers when they should be the one providing safety and support for us as citizens. Another huge factor that goes into systemic racism is poor education for minorities. There is an evident, clear lack of care for minorities and their education. It is much more difficult for minorities to get a good education and thus a good career in their future because of the limits that have been put on them when they had started their education. Now that we have talked about the problems in systemic racism, I'm going to be explaining the causes for these problems. Racial discrimination / lack of repercussions, and the lack of funding for schools. First, police brutality. Racial discrimination is deeply rooted in our criminal justice system. Most of our officers are white males who carry a lot of stereotypes. Stereotypes give these officers power to act as they please with aggression towards certain groups. They can see them as more dangerous or just as more of a threat to people like their own. And to add to that, officers are rarely held accountable to the most extent of their actions and most of the time get away with assault and essentially murder. Our next cause is lack of funding for impoverished schools. It is no surprise that schools that are located in poor neighborhoods don't receive as much funding from the government as private schools or public schools that are just in a better area. In May of 2020, Future ED suggests that there is a tipping point somewhere between 50 to 60% of school students that live in poverty where their performance decline. And just because of the location and the majority of the students being minorities that attend these schools is not a reason for government to not provide sufficient funding for these schools. And that is the sole purpose that they don't do it. And they just don't want to see these kids succeed and they don't give them an equal playing field. Although systemic racism is a main problem in our country, here are some ideas for solutions. There are 2 kinds of solutions: large-scale solutions and personal solutions. With regards for police brutality, better training for police officers has to be implemented in their work because it can help take away discrimination and a lot of the poor choices and actions they make because their job is to protect and serve the citizens, not injure and most of the time kill them as well. And it is important to learn that these trainings are important because it helps fix the discrimination that is deeply rooted in the system. Current training focuses much on firearm skills and omits its conflict management skills, stated Harvard IOP in February of 2023. As for poor education for minorities, government really just has to provide proper funding for these schools. And regardless of their location and the demographic that attend these schools, it's not an excuse for them to not provide sufficient funding, because they have to provide at least a sufficient kind of funding and just adequate. Now that we know the large-scale solutions for these two problems, let's talk about the personal solutions that us as a society can do. As for police brutality, protests are a great start. It only takes one person to inspire millions of people to get up and take a stand for what they believe in. And for this issue especially, it helps hold these police officers that have done these bad deeds and puts them away and makes them realize that what they've done, and they face the repercussions of their actions. And it's up to us as a society to start and take that stand if the law enforcement and the system won't do it themselves. As for poor education for minorities, if government isn't going to provide proper spending, we should try to help do it. We can try to fundraise money in any type of way to help give these kids a equal chance in life, just like all the other kids. Today, we talked about two major problems that go into systemic racism. Then I explained to you what causes these issues, and then I suggested solutions of different kinds to help fix this. Systemic racism is one of the main problems in our country today. And because it's such a main problem, it's not a problem that's going to be easily fixed. However, with more information and more knowledge that our society gains on it and the actions we do to take a stand, it can only get better, one step at a time.